So I have a few questions, and I think we have some graphics that may complement some of this. So, there we go. So you can go on to the next. And again, some of these are on the QR codes that you saw. So I'm sure there was a reference to this in one of the conversations, right? Understanding the difference between equity, inequality, the importance of that distinction. And one of the things I really appreciate about the documentary is this really reestablishing the idea of the inherent worth and value of every individual person. We can go to the next slide, which is a different graphic. What I appreciate about this is that it's sort of different than the first one. There's this idea that if we try to achieve equity, we have to take somebody's box away, right? And I think this illustrates that we have enough wealth and resources to make sure people have what they need, and that it doesn't require taking something away from you to ensure that people get what they need. But in our conversation, we actually talked about equity and equality in the context of the unhoused and different kinds of equity. So Terence, I want you to maybe illustrate some of what we've talked about in terms of the different kinds of equity, and how it relates to your film.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me again. I was less than a mile away from the Lorraine Motel on ML King Day. I was interviewing this lady named Catherine in her tent. ML King was in Memphis standing alongside those who were making low wages, sanitation workers, etc. And I asked her a very specific question. I said, how do you feel in relationship to community? And she says, what community? And it made me think about cognitive justice and this idea of what it means to reframe narratives that have been embedded in us based upon social and political rhetoric and how we have been fashioned to frame, to view people. Most people don't even know that there are 5 periods of homelessness in the United States. Most people don't know the first protest that happened in the United States where those who were unhoused were vets in 1932. Most people don't understand that within the last almost 50 years that homelessness itself became a criminal issue. They don't understand that back in the early 1900s and the later 1800s, that there were things called safe houses and almshouses where police stations and medical facilities would open up their doors and invite those who were unhoused in. Why? Because they were young white guys serving in the army. And when they protested in 1932 and protested Hoover bills, guess what happened? They started getting resources. They started being understood. It wasn't until in the 1980s under the Reagan administration when all of the deinstitutionalization happened and all of the tax cuts and the affordability that this rhetoric came out about those who were Black and brown, who were impoverished. And guess what? That rhetoric bled over into the criminalizing laws that have framed how people who are unhoused are seen and viewed. And when I say cognitive justice, I'm meaning sitting with yourself and understanding the history and how you have been fashioned and shaped to view a population of people that you've never met. Cognitive justice has to do and has to be about reframing. Why you believe what you believe about somebody you've never met. And then you have to deal with spatial justice. This idea of public sanitation. I was giving this lecture at Georgia Tech to architects, and they wanted me to come in and talk about empathy and architectural design. And I started going through the history of hostile architecture, how it went from racialized hostile architecture to class hostile architecture. When you see boulders underneath bridges and spikes in alleyways, and you're trying to design and structure a city based upon who you want to be included and who you want to be excluded. And I came up with this quote: everyone is welcome is different from we built this with you in mind. Spatial justice means that we create the type of belonging where all are welcome. And we really say that you're welcome because we built this with you in mind. We built this city with you in mind. We built this park with you in mind. We built this with you in mind. And it doesn't matter your social location because you're included, because you're a part of the beloved community. Spatial justice. How you identify. It doesn't matter. You belong. Spatial justice. It doesn't matter how much you have in your bank account or where you emerge from or your social location. You belong because you are a living and breathing human being. And then access justice. Sometimes we leave the B and the A off of DEI. We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we leave our belonging at access. What does it mean to design and create things where people truly belong? Because I've been a part of rooms where they say I was included, but it was limited inclusion. It was the type of inclusion that says you can come, but you can only come so far. So those things that we need to deal with.
I appreciate that, especially in terms of how we design cities. And we know that we live in a city here where a lot of things are being designed that are not accessible, where the spatial equity is intended to keep people out in a way. And I think that's something that we can sort of keep in mind in the spaces as well, where we see an increasing problem with the unhoused. I wanted to talk a little bit about intersectionality and diversity, which is a conversation I believe that Ms. Atala led in the space. And it really struck me in the documentary, the piece about the person with the disability, right? If we actually go to the next slide. So these are other slides you saw, those identities on the inside, but clearly there are other identities. So something like parental status in the documentary, right? Someone with kids is going to experience being unhoused in a very different way than someone who doesn't. And that's not to say that there's a value of some over others, but that we have to take into account this full spectrum of identities. And I was sharing with you over coffee one day in the spaces where I work, where I was working with a young Black transgender woman and had found a shelter that would take her, right? This idea that you're welcome here is not the same thing we designed this with you in mind. When she got there, it was only under the condition that she be in that space using her biological name at birth. She had to change, she was required to change clothes and wear the appropriate clothing of her birth at her gender at birth. And so she couldn't do it. She was allowed to be there under the conditions that she strip away her sense of self, her sense of dignity that she had come into. And so putting those parameters on people are designing a space where you say, you're welcome to come here and find housing, but the building is not accessible for someone in a wheelchair. Can you talk a little bit about how intersectionality shows up in terms of unhoused populations?
Yeah, Catherine, she was living in a tent, but she was also a middle-aged white woman. She was in the film. And I just want to pause parenthetically and just appreciate all of the courage that it took for those who are unhoused to actually insert their voices. And this research all was around centering their voices, passing the microphone, right? But she told me, she says, I hate it for my Black friends. I said, why, Catherine? She said, because I can use my whiteness to walk into a hotel and use the restroom, and my friend who is Black, who is unhoused, will walk into that same hotel and get the police call. So you can be unhoused and have multiple identities. She says, I have it really easy, and I know how to even dress up, get myself together, put on a little makeup, and go and get things that would take some of my friends who are a different race than me longer. And you think about the intersection of that. I mean, intersectionality is when multiple things converge all at once. It's to be unhoused, that's one. It's to be Black, that's another. is to have a disability or live with a temporary or permanent disability. That's another. Is to not have access to a wheelchair. Wheelchairs are expensive. Just last year, I was in a car accident a little over a year ago. I ended up staying in the hospital for a little over a month. I had to learn how to walk again. It took me months and months. I was confined to a bed. I lost all mobility. And when my wife and my family started looking up wheelchairs and access to walkers, I mean, a good wheelchair, like a good one, almost $1,000. And then when I am fortunate and I'm doing work amongst those who are unhoused, there's some of our friends out there right now who don't have access to a proper walker that's their height. I ran into those beautiful, beloved people in the state of Tennessee, and we don't understand all the systemic factors that compound with all of the multiple identities that people are wrestling with.
Absolutely. Can we go to the next slide? One of the things that I think is important when we talk about this diversity is also looking at our proximity to power. And when we look at those, the other slide with the equity versus equality, one thing that really stands out to me, and I was telling my youth advocates this the other night, is those boxes don't just come out of nowhere, right? People recognize their social location and proximity to power, be that you're a citizen or you're cisgender, or you speak English, and oftentimes if you were to say, as someone that identifies as both Black and queer, I say, oh, I'm definitely on the outside, on the margins. No, I got a post-secondary education, I own my home, I speak English. And it's interesting, and I think my colleague Martha speaks to this a lot, we tend to lean into where we don't have privilege. Because I think it's sometimes uncomfortable for us to think about where we do have privilege, because with that privilege comes a responsibility. If I'm an English speaker, how am I being mindful for the people at the hourly circle, right? If my gender identity is not something that's going to complicate my life, how am I thinking about people that might be non-binary or trans and their level of access to the same things? Let's go to the next slide really quick. So you already kind of spoke to this idea of like DEI and sort of like, what does it mean to go beyond that and that sense of belonging? And can you connect with me, connect for me and for the audience, King's beloved community and this idea of belonging and access?
Yeah. I think about when King first started using the phrase right after Montgomery West boycott beloved community. And the reason why I say belonging is an act of justice, because belonging creates space for everyone to exist, no matter their race, gender, the social location, where they emerge from, period. And then King later pushes this idea, and he says, no, we live in a world house. This idea that King saw the world as our address is powerful. The world is our address. So who is your neighbor? Anybody you come in close proximity to.
I want to actually speak to that, because one of the things that struck me in the documentary is your framing of each individual person that spoke as a community member. Right? That just really stood out to me, because so often we don't see people that are unhoused. One, can you be in a community if you don't have a house or an address, right? So there are even ways that we delineate who gets to belong and be as part of the community.
Yeah. Also, I've always questioned and wondered, why don't we add the subject of homelessness to the DEI conversation? Have you ever heard it? Have you ever talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to someone who doesn't have an address? And if King's idea beckons us to see this globe, the world, as a world house, that everybody who is belonging to this world house resides in the same address, then even our neighbors, those without an address, because it doesn't matter if you have an address or not, you steal someone's name. Even if our neighbors don't have an address, we have to treat them and create the type of space where they can exist and stop and push back and resist this public sanitation. Isn't it funny that we have to use concepts and things like beloved community and world house and belonging to justify the reason why we should include all people? That's disheartening. It's heartbreaking. There was a gentleman in the documentary, Monterio, in Nashville. We're probably 3 miles away from where they voted on the law. And I asked him a question. I said, do you feel like you belong? You heard his response to the film. He says, I feel like I might as well be in a firing squad. And you should just take me on out. What I didn't put in the film was my follow-up question. I asked him, why do you say that? He said, because when people walk by me and they look down on me because I don't have an address, they're taking a shot. When people judge me based upon my inability to access a shower, they're taking a shot. When people misstereotype me and don't understand that I have love in my heart, that I am a human being, that I want to see my life flourish just like anyone else's, they're taking a shot. And I could say that could be for anybody who identifies in the image, or those who identify that are living with a disability, or those who have been stereotyped because of ageism, right? Or ableism, right? On all of the isms. I'm talking about creating the type of space that when a person shows up, regardless where they come from, they feel like they matter and they belong. And I get really passionate, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We're usually in the coffee shops. We can get as loud as we need to. I want to go to the next slide, and this is actually kind of a call to action. Well, actually, I want you to talk about this. So, we're not going to say the word, but Terence and I were having this conversation. Obviously, I do a lot of work in DEI, and we were talking about how right now, DEI is getting hit on both sides, right? There are people on one side that are like, you shouldn't be doing this at all because it's not important, everything's great, America's great again, whatever that is. And then you have people on the other side that says DEI doesn't go far enough, right? It's performative, it's cosmetic, right? And so you introduced me to this acronym, which I will never forget at this point because it totally matches a lot of the performative and cosmetic stuff that I see. For example, it's June, now everybody wants to celebrate Pride, and on July 1st, the rainbow will disappear, right? The rainbow doesn't disappear, but figuratively speaking, we have these cosmetic ways that we introduce things. You know, I always tell people, my busiest months are February and June. Right? That's when people want me to come speak and talk. Right? I can talk in October, I can talk in November, like spread the wealth out a little bit. But just the way that we tokenize things. So speak a little bit about this acronym that you gave me and just how can we as people that are in workplaces really push our organizations to get beyond the...
Yeah, I mean, like, think about it, like, we're about to celebrate Juneteenth, right? And in the state of Florida, the students in the Florida school system can't even learn about it. that's, you know, and it's a national holiday. I was talking to a colleague, Dr. Cosby, and he said it's SHIT. Performative DEI work is about symbols. It's a bumper sticker. It's a rainbow. It's some type of trinket to say, we're here. We're just going to use the symbol, but we're not going to go too far about creating real moment. It's holidays. Let me appease some folks. let me hush some folks up. Let's pass this holiday, but we're gonna miss the structural stuff that we need to change. Right? We got a holiday, but yet we pass a law to say we got to stop being woke. We have a holiday, but we pass laws that still criminalize those who are unhoused. We have holidays, but we still keep at bay the structural changes that actually need to take place. And what about the images? Right? We celebrate, Because representation matters, right? Representation matters. It took me great pride to take my daughter to see herself reflected in a film that comes out of Hollywood. But then when we get into the car, I still have to talk to her about the things that she may face as a young Black woman. Because things are still structurally set up to exclude her in certain spaces. Images. We don't want just images anymore. We don't want depictions of change, we want actual change. Yeah. And then you have tokens. And man, I've been a token. And being a Black person and being invited into the space to have your skin color at a table but not your voice is a very disheartening thing. Absolutely. I want your skin for marketing, but not your voice for truth and inclusion. And we got
I want your input, but I'm not actually going to integrate it. Right? I'm sure people have been in spaces where we collect the input, but you never see it make its way into the actual change of a policy or anything like that. Yeah. Let's look at the next one real quick, because I definitely want to open it up where we can engage in conversation. So I consider myself a strong ally of a lot of communities, and this quote shook me to my core. It says, if you want to be someone's ally, but haven't been hit by stones being thrown at them, you aren't standing close enough to them yet.
Say that again. This is one of the coffee quotes there.
Yeah. If you want to be someone's ally, but haven't been hit by stones being thrown at them, you aren't standing close enough to them yet. I do like the yet. Because for me, that was a kind of call to action. I think the last part of our conversation is around what does meaningful, actual allyship look like? Because I think what happens in a lot of cases, what allyship looks like for most people is, I'm going to let you get hit by the stone because I'm not in your group. And then I'm going to come over after with a Band-Aid. Say, Terence, we know that kind of allyship. We're not standing in the way of the harm, but we want to show up to repair them. And I think that there's a continuum here, and the call to action is, where's your proximity to the people that are being harmed, right? And are you willing to put when we go through the National Center for Civil Human Rights and see the white and the Black people at the lunch counter with mayonnaise and mustard, and people that may have done the lunch counter. How many people here have done the lunch counter upstairs? If you haven't, it's available after. But it's a real visceral reminder of what the sacrifice that people made with their bodies for justice and equity. And so one more slide here, and I definitely want to get your thoughts about that. This is on the human rights floor, and it actually talks, we didn't really go there today, but it talks about the roles that people play. So you have enablers, right? And this was talking about sort of crimes that are happening, human rights violations. You have perpetuators. And I think a lot of people feel like, well, I'm not an enabler or a perpetuator, so I'm fine, right? But then there are other roles that people play. And a lot of people are just bystanders, right? I watch it happen, and maybe I get a Band-Aid after. There's ordinary society, right? People can either be upstanders or bystanders. So if you're an upstander, I like to say an interrupter, those are people who help those targeted for violence or death, often at great personal risk. They speak out, offer assistance, and intervene to prevent abuse. Not I show up after the abuse has been done, right? So I think that that's a different call to action than a lot of us see. And then obviously other victims that are targeted by violence. The next slide talks really briefly about why people play these roles. And I think it's important that we actually individually process that. It's okay to be afraid. It's good, right? Yeah. But you have to own that. Like, I'm not sure I'm willing to put my body on the line or speak up at this particular moment because it may put me at harm. That's okay, but I think that's honest to people. And I think, what do you think the challenge is in terms of the real actual allyship that we try to get people to lean into when it comes to the unhoused? Because it's tough work. I mean, I pass homeless people all the time, and there's always do I speak, do I acknowledge a person's humanity? If I'm giving something, is that enough? Is there something else I need to be doing? I think we want to offer people in the space, what does actual allyship look like, with regard to the unhoused?
Yeah. I'll tell a story. So, okay. We started this museum called Dignity Museum. It's the first museum in the United States that represents the subject of homelessness. It's housed in the Civic Museum. It's an immersive experience. As interactive stories, we center the voices. We've had all types of people come through, legislators to K through 12, college students, has been at university, blah, blah, blah. We have this seventh grade class comes from this private school. I'll never forget it. We're standing in the museum and this young lady is engaging with the content. And afterwards, with her educators standing in the museum, she breaks down in tears. And everybody turns towards her and she says, what's going on, what's going on? She says, my parents taught me to fear poor people. Let me ask you, what has taught you to fear the unhoused? What has taught you to have the type of framing that you have towards this population? And when you ask me this question, we have to, George Lakoff in his book, Don't Eat Elephant, he says, reframing is a part of social change. And we have to start with reframing. Because if we make the Band-Aid solutions without having the correct view of the people that we're standing in solidarity with, we're still causing more trauma and pain. So we need to reframe how we even see this population. Because just because someone is unhoused, homelessness is not monolithic. There are over 150 people in the entire world that don't have somewhere to stay at night. It's not just relegated to a bunch of people who you may pass by on the street corner. Homelessness affects moms who are fleeing domestic violence. The largest population of people who are unhoused are children under the age of 9 who didn't make the decision not to have an address. Homelessness affects youth who identify a certain way and their families have put them out. Homelessness affects those who lost their jobs or became ill during COVID. Right now, I'm in my scholarly opinion, I'm suggesting that we are about to enter into a third mass homelessness era, which I'm defining as the era of unaffordability. And it will be people who have never been unhoused who will become unhoused because they can no longer afford to stay in certain areas. And we've already started to see this trend according to research, and this suggests by the end of 2024, we're going to see a 30% increase in homelessness, not with those who are chronically unhoused, but those who have never been unhoused before. So we need to reframe this subject so we can orient ourselves and understand how we can stand in solidarity with those who don't have anywhere to go.
I think one of the jarring things about the documentary was everybody kind of had to sign the legislator who was making the comment and oddly made the comparison to like Hitler as an example of a success story of somebody that, I mean, it was just like almost unbelievable to kind of witness that.
It's that type of rhetoric though that creates the frames. And when those frames are created, they're just like these glasses that we have on. People put them on and they start to see people through the lenses they're wearing, based upon who's influencing them by their rhetoric. I did a rhetorical analysis. I pulled these clips. I did an interpretive analysis because I wanted to understand what were people saying. The governor in that particular state said, I let the law pass and I didn't even sign it. You didn't sign it? You're not close to people? You didn't invite stakeholders to the table? Oh, so you're going to use one of the 3 laws of power, which is non-decisions. A non-decision is basically exerting power to keep people's interests off of the agenda. So how do you do that? You hold meetings when people are at work. How do you do that? You sign bills and you talk about issues with your relationships of people behind closed doors, and you keep those interests of folks who are vulnerable, who are unvoiced or voiceless or unheard in the circumstances, and you keep them off of the agenda by excluding their interests. That's why we see more apathy when it comes to trying to organize people around changing things that have been instituted by those within power. And we got to challenge and hold those people accountable by what they are saying, because they're creating a world that people believe and live in based upon what they've heard and saw. Reframing is a part of social change, and we got to do that reframing work.
Absolutely. I think we all do have power.
Yes.
So looking at that wheel of power as an opportunity to build a box, to create the equity that we want to see. And I think we all play a role in that. So I want to open up for maybe a couple of comments and questions before we get hands in the back already. Can we get an Oprah to walk around and, or can you come up toward the front? We want to make sure that people hear you. Because I just think myself by saying Oprah. She hasn't done a talk show. Come on up here. No.
So I work in the house community.
Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
So I work in the house community a lot. I work with Austin County. I was wondering, what policies would you like to see enacted for the house community to have access to?
Yeah, it's a great question. There is a lot, but one that I would like to see almost affect immediately is that everyone who is unhoused has an address. And when I say an address, I mean somewhere where they can receive mail, where they can actually go to a physical location and access documents. We've done work with unhoused individuals where they didn't have access to their identification cards because public suites would have their documents thrown away. And you have to literally hire an attorney to have the attorney prove that they are who they say they are to solicit birth records. And sometimes that process can take 8 months, 6 to 8 months, depending upon the actual organization they have to receive the records from. With the address does a lot. Address can get you a bank account. Address can get you a job. You know how many people that were employable that we worked with couldn't get hired because they didn't have a what? Address gets you what? Identification. I have a brother named Mark Moore who escaped homelessness. He said, when I was living on the streets and I didn't have identification, I didn't even feel like I was a citizen because I had to prove who I say I was. An address. It should be mandated that across this country, every single person who is unhoused has an opportunity to have access somewhere, a P.O. box, some type of address that gives them access to move forward.
One or two more questions. Yes. We have someone come over with the mic.
Yeah, this is less of a question, more of a comment, but something that was like kind of left out is how a lot of unhoused people are actually people who are like drug addicts and people with mental illness. And I feel like that's really important to acknowledge because it's like, it's a disability that they can't really control, and as things all agree with a lot of those people because like, I ended up like, I don't know, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts about like how preventing people with disabilities can how we can do that so that those people won't be unhoused as often as they are.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Your comment makes me think about our dear brother Jordan Neely, up in New York who was choked on a subway station. What people don't know that goes deeper into his story is that Jordan immediately saw his mother murdered when he was 14 years old, was made to testify in court, was put in the foster care system, didn't receive the proper support for all the trauma that he experienced, zero out of the foster care system, and thrust onto the streets. No family, no support, etc. It's something to be said about the healthcare industry and the inaccessibility of those who are poor, experiencing trauma, who are unhoused, who can't access those types of resources. You know how much it costs to actually go to therapy? I don't know how many of you go to therapy. I do. I mean, do we know how much the sessions cost? Like, and just think if you get session after session and you have 10 sessions and 10 sessions turn to 16, that's inaccessible to someone who may be unhoused or poor. And then we have a shortage of healthcare professionals around the country. How do I know? Because I'm also a clinician. How do I know? Because my sister is a clinician. She's a social worker in the DC system. And she says it's so horrible in DC. They're almost trying to pay for people to go to school to become clinicians so they can help with the demand that's out there. Also want to mention this, that there are multiple triggers into homelessness, and most people think that there are mental health issues and drug addiction, but the leading cause is actually jobless. I'm saying this, we've got to stop using a person's label and something that they're struggling through to justify our mistreatment of them. To be alive is to experience trauma. So whether you have an address or not, I know people right now who are housed that do drugs just as much as somebody who might be unhoused. I know people right now who do just as much as therapy as someone who doesn't have anywhere to stay. I mean, can we be honest with that? Yes. So when I talk about the issue of homelessness, we gotta center the personhood and stop using someone's inability to access an address to define how we see them. Because trauma affects us all.
Yeah, share this mic. So, in the interest of time, no. That was because my mic was going with. So we are going to close out the conversation. A couple of quick announcements that I want to give to Phil just to make sure. We do have parking validation available for people at the registration table. So that will be the case. And then there are also some people here that have. Terence will be doing a book signing, and you can purchase his new book, which is actually not even the official release date is what, like another week, like in 8 days. So his book, All God's Children, is available outside, and a few people have actually, through your registration, secured free copies of those books. So I actually want to read those names out. Oh, there it is. All the green names, okay. So, in addition to all the youth advocates, can y'all stand? I think both Terence and I wanted to make sure that y'all will get a copy of the book. Thank you so much for listening. In addition to you, we also have Lisa Chang, George Father Reed, let's see. Oh, actually, yeah, I don't know these names. Give me 1 second. So the names that I call out, well, we're gonna ask that they go to the table first, and Terence will be able to give you your copies of the books, and then everybody else after will be able to purchase. I took a picture of it.